Okay, so the next part of the build is building up the tail. Part of that is the tail gearbox which goes into our frames. This sits at the front and it takes its drive, goes that way up, takes its drive off of the main gear here and drives the torque tube through the bevel. We've also got pre-built our tail gearbox. This one we actually do need to take the various bolts out, Loctite them and reinstall them just to be sure. And we also need to build our tail rotor up on here. And then once we've done that, we can install both of these items onto our tail boom. We've got to make up the torque tube which goes into the tail boom as well, and then our boom struts, horizontal fin, vertical fin, all that stuff needs to go on. And then once we've built up the entire tail section, we then insert the whole lot into our main frames at the front, inserting this piece into the main frames and then bolt it all in, and that's the back end of our helicopter done. So first of all, Loctite the stuff on here and then we'll start building up our tail rotor. Okay, so here we have the parts for building up our tail rotor. We have a ball here which needs to go onto the bottom of the pitch slider here. This is our control rod, or control horn I should say. The ball that we're going to put there goes in this cup here. We need to put this ball here on here. This will be, the ball will be on the underside of this, so it effectively pivots on that cup. Well, pivots on this point here, and that cup basically moves the tail pitch slider. And this is bolted through into our tail gearbox. And then we've got our tail grips as well, and we need to take the bolts out of these, make sure they're Loctited and then reinstall them, and that's very important because this is going to be spinning at high speed and the last thing you want is one of those grips coming off. Okay, so it's ready for installation. Pitch slider, which I've put the ball onto, the control horn, which I've also put the ball onto with a little M2 nut the other side and Loctited in place. There's a screw that goes through this and there are two washers that go with that. One goes on the head and then the other one goes between this and our tail gearbox when it mounts onto this arm here. So at this point we can put these pieces onto our tail output shaft and get those in place, and then we can get our tail rotor, which I have here, and we can install that onto the shaft as well, lock it in place with the provided grub screw, and then we connect our tail pitch slider to our tail grips here using these little screws and some Loctite, and these brass couplings here go inside the plastic part here. So these are just a spacer or a shim that allow this screw to move smoothly within that plastic casing. Okay, so there we have our pitch slider installed, and the control horn, so it works like so. Ball underneath the bottom of the gearbox. So you can see how that goes. So the next thing for us to do is to mount our tail rotor on the end of the shaft here and put a grub screw through the hole in it to lock it into that little recess there in the end of the output shaft. And then once we've done that, we can connect these arms to our grips. Okay, and there we have our tail rotor installed onto the shaft and locked in place, and then I've connected up with the screws and bushes through the pitch slider into our grips. And also take note of the orientation here, which is on the T-Rex 700. The tail rotor will spin this direction like so, and the control for the pitch on the tail blade leads the grip, so this is in front of the grip as it spins that direction. Okay, so that's our tail rotor complete, and we can see that working the pitch on our blades. Now we need to install this onto our boom, and then we can install the other end into our gearbox, horizontal fins and vertical fins and boom struts on, and then we can install that into the machine. Okay, here we have our boom. One end it has a slot, and that's the end that goes into the front gearbox. And at the other end we have just a hole, you see here, and this is what locates our tail gearbox onto the boom. So we have this little plastic piece here which locates into that hole there, like so, and it also goes through a hole in the gearbox which you can see there, and that basically holds that in the correct orientation onto our tail boom, and then we have some screws that go through the vertical fin to hold that all in place. Okay, so here we have the vertical fin. I've put that locator bracket on there with the various screws through it, and the cups, the silver cups for those screws on the other side, and then that is going to go through our boom and gearbox. So here's our boom and gearbox. That needs to locate into there like so. Then you line up the hole like that, and then this piece bolts. So you can see it's all lined up. This piece bolts onto like that, and that locator pin goes through the two holes and holds that in place. Okay, there we have it installed. You can see it's pinched the metal together here to clamp that onto the end of the boom, but it's also through that locator slot, so it can't actually twist or move on the boom. So the next thing we're going to do is slide the various bits and pieces that we need on the boom for our control rod to go down to the back here to support that. And we also need to look at mounting up the horizontal fin on here as well, and the boom supports. Okay, here we have our horizontal fin and fin clamp. These bolts here basically bolt that onto the top of the clamp. We've got these little washers here which also go on the top there, so that the bolt heads don't crush into the carbon. And then these bolts here are the ones that basically bolt into the side here and hold our boom supports in place. Okay, so there we have our horizontal fin mounted. On the previous step I also made a little error in pointing out the wrong washer to put on the top. I showed this one. This is the one that actually goes on the side here. The ones that go on the top are the cupped washers that the bolt heads sit down inside of. The next part for us to do is to mount our boom supports onto here. They are held on with these big screws and washers. One thing that I've learned from experience with the TRX 700 is that these bolts come undone. So when you put these in, make sure you've cleaned out the thread here, that there's no engineering grease inside there, and put loads of Loctite on this. This needs to be absolutely caked in Loctite so that there is absolutely no chance it's going to back out. If it does come out, your boom support is either going to go up through your blades, break your blades and cause a crash, or it's going to go down underneath the machine and make it very difficult to land. Okay, so there we have our tail boom supports mounted with the big bolts and loads of Loctite. I also noticed that I've got on here the tail push rod as well, and the push rod supports are in place. And if we come back down the other end, you see I've just got a ball link on there and I've clicked it into place. I've also put the tail blades onto the tail rotor here, and just put that down so you can notice the orientation here. So the leading edge of the blade here is going to come forward and up towards the boom, and then backwards towards the back of the model, and the tail rotor will basically spin anti-clockwise like so. So that's the outside of the tail boom completed, and we now need to insert the torque tube or shaft drive inside here, and we need to make that up first, so that's our next job. Once the shaft drive is located, shouldn't be much poking out the end here, as you can see, and if you twist that, which I'm about to do, you should see the tail rotor will rotate like so. That's all nicely located. So now we can mount our front gearbox on here and then put it into the frames. Okay, so I've partially slid the front gearbox on. I wanted to point out is that there is a hole in the boom here and a hole in the gearbox. Those basically need to line up, so you need to give this a little twist to get it located onto the end of the shaft drive, in which it won't go, so I just do that off camera. Okay, you can see that's now on there. What I've noticed is that the holes here don't actually line up that well. Looks like there's possibly a 5-degree, maybe slightly less than that, misalignment. So it may take a little bit of twisting in order to get this screw here to locate. If it won't, then we may have to alter the slot on the boom slightly, just a little bit of filing just to get the twist that we need in the gearbox here to get that locator hole to line up. Okay, so there we have our locator pin in place. Next we need to install these 4 screws, which come with 4 nylock nuts, and they basically go through here and here to clamp the gearbox together. And then once we've done that, we can insert it into the frames. Okay, so there we have that bolted in place, back there too, so that's now ready for inserting into the back of our main frames. When we do put it into the back of the main frames, there are 8 screws which hold it in place, which are these. We also need to bolt our boom supports here into the back of our frames as well, and there is a frame spacer with the 2 bolts supplied in order to do that. With these bolts, again, you want to put lots of Loctite on these to hold them in place, because you get a fair amount of vibration on the boom supports, and these will need a good deal of Loctite on them to stop them from coming undone due to that vibration. Okay, and there we have the tail gearbox secured with these 4 screws here, and the same the other side. The boom supports are now in place, and that rear frame spacer is what the screws are screwed into. Plenty of Loctite on these, as I said. And I've also clicked, I'm not sure if I can show you this, let's just rotate the model. There we go, I've clicked the tail push rod under here onto the control.